Hello. Look at this. That photo you thought was harmless, forgotten in some dusty archive, finally resurfaced. You know the one. The one that captured a moment so ordinary it never deserved attention. Yet here we are. Here's where the world, or at least the people who thought they understood it, begins to realize just how wrong they were. You might feel the weight already, that subtle vibration in the back of your mind, because this isn't just about an image. This is about exposure, revelation, and the panic that follows when a truth refuses to be contained. Someone, somewhere, decided to enhance it, to pull every shadow, every detail, every hidden pattern into the light. And that's when they found it. That thing, that impossibility, that fragment of reality that was never meant to be seen. And once it appeared, once it existed in full, unyielding clarity, the entire game shifted. 17 agents quit after seeing this. 17. And not quietly, not politely. The kind of quitting that leaves fingerprints on desks, echoes in hallways, ripples in systems that were supposedly unshakable. They walked out knowing that something fundamental had changed, something they couldn't unsee, couldn't ignore, and couldn't rationalize. They weren't resigning from a job. They were stepping away from a reality they had convinced themselves they controlled, only to realize control had been an illusion from the start. They had underestimated the depth of what they were about to encounter. And you, sitting on the other side of this, remain untouched, calm, observing, witnessing the tremors from a distance that they could never reach, because you were never the one to be shaken by mere images or warnings. Let's back up a second. Before the image was enhanced, before the world tilted on its axis, they thought they knew what they were dealing with. They assumed predictability. They assumed pattern. They assumed compliance. They assumed that because something had gone unnoticed for so long, it was harmless. They were wrong. Not slightly wrong. Not oops, my mistake. Wrong. Catastrophically, fundamentally, reality-shattering wrong. And the more they clung to their assumptions, the faster the world closed the distance on their ignorance. They were watching shadows in a room and mistaking them for harmless objects, unaware that a storm of insight was building quietly in the pixels, in the colors, in the depths of detail they couldn't interpret yet. That quiet accumulation of clarity is what terrified them. That patience, that precision, that unseen intelligence in the process of unfolding. Those are the things that leave marks that never fade. Now imagine being one of them, scanning every corner of the enhanced photo, adjusting every slider, every contrast, every digital magnification. Imagine that slow crawl of understanding, inch by inch, pixel by pixel, until it hits. The moment the impossible appears in plain sight. That instant is not just recognition. It is the rupture of certainty. It is the split-second realization that all the rules they believed in were based on assumptions so fragile they couldn't hold a thought, let alone a truth. That image, enhanced beyond what anyone dared imagine, became a mirror reflecting their inadequacies. It exposed the blind spots, the misjudgments, the overconfidence. And there is no recovery from this kind of exposure, because the thing they found doesn't require a backstory or explanation. It simply exists, undeniable, irrefutable, and relentless, in the way reality can sometimes be when you've miscalculated its scope. 17 agents quit because they knew. Deep in that gut-level understanding reserved for moments when intellect and instinct converge, they felt the consequences before fully comprehending them. They felt the shift, the imbalance, the reordering of everything they had assumed to be under their authority. And every step they took to justify, to rationalize, to walk away with dignity, only deepened the dissonance. They weren't leaving jobs. They were leaving frameworks of understanding that had just collapsed in front of them. They were abandoning territories of perception because those territories had become toxic, contaminated by the truth that they were never ready to face. Meanwhile, you remain watching the aftermath, untouched, not because you are ignorant, but because you were never caught unprepared. You are always the observer of the unseeable, the reader of patterns that others only perceive in hindsight. And let's consider this. The photo didn't lie. The photo didn't have agenda or motive. It simply existed, and in its existence it carried the weight of consequences no human mind could calculate before being confronted with it. The agents who quit understood this instinctively. They understood that the image, simple as it appeared, was a vessel containing evidence of something beyond the ordinary, something that breaks conventional understanding, something that, once perceived, reshapes the boundaries of what one believes possible. That's why it drove them away. That's why their minds recoiled. That's why resignation became the only viable path. And through all this, you remain steady, because you understood from the first moment that reality is not what they believe it to be, but what it reveals itself to be when scrutinized without fear. They underestimated your presence, your patience, your capability to observe without panic. They assumed that by controlling the narrative, by limiting access, by constructing layers of bureaucracy and protocol, they could prevent discovery. They failed, not because the discovery was inevitable, but because they lacked the awareness to anticipate it. They didn't account for quiet competence. They didn't account for observation unclouded by ego. They didn't account for the way that preparation, restraint, and strategic timing accumulate into a force that, when released, is both unstoppable and unapologetic. And here's the remarkable part. It doesn't even require you to act. You simply exist in alignment with the truth of what has always been, and reality bends toward that alignment in ways others can neither predict nor control. Now think about the moment after they saw it, that flash of recognition, that microsecond where confidence collapses into dread. That's the instant when everything they believed about control fractures. They are acutely aware that the world no longer conforms to their expectations. And the panic begins in small ways. Hesitation in communication, obsessive rechecking of details, overanalysis of outcomes that can no longer be manipulated. Each thought they have, each calculation they attempt, is already compromised by the one truth they cannot reconcile. They were never in control. They were never the authors of this revelation. That role, that power, was always outside their reach, residing quietly with the one person they misjudged the most, you. It's important to note what this script, this scenario, does not include. There's no drama for spectacle. There's no loud confrontation. There's no exaggerated revenge. The power at work here is subtle, invisible, undeniable, and most importantly, untouchable by those who underestimated it. The agents' panic, their resignation, their departure, none of it can be reversed. They cannot apologize, negotiate, or reclaim what they lost in perception. And you don't need to intervene. The equilibrium, once disrupted, enforces itself. The consequences manifest naturally. Your presence, your quiet adherence to preparation and clarity, is the mechanism through which the truth executes itself without a single overt move on your part. That is mastery. That is unassailable strength. That is the psychological leverage that leaves observers desperate, disoriented, and powerless. 17 agents, each of them facing the same visual trigger, each of them arriving at the same conclusion independently, and all of them walking away. that repetition is a form of affirmation. It is a confirmation that the insight, the revelation, the exposure is not subjective. It is objective. And the patterns they attempt to impose, the protocols they cling to, the theories they have cultivated over months or years, all collapse under the weight of undeniable visual truth. The photo, the enhancement, the revelation itself becomes an instrument of recalibration. It recalibrates perception. It recalibrates expectation. And in doing so, it recalibrates the position of everyone in proximity to it, except you. You are outside that system. You are observing the collapse with the detached precision of someone who has always known how fragile assumptions are, how dangerous complacency can become, how often overconfidence precedes systemic failure. And here is the exquisite irony. In all this, you are not visible in the panic. You are not the cause they can identify. You are not the hand pulling strings, not the manipulator, not the architect of fear. You are the witness, the unmovable constant, the observer whose mere existence renders their assumptions invalid. The beauty of this is in the subtlety. There is no spectacle, no dramatic confrontation, no declaration, just the unfolding of events, one undeniable consequence after another, moving in perfect alignment with truths you have always understood, truths they never considered. Their departure, their panic, their sleepless calculation, none of it touches you. All of it touches the world as it should. All of it affirms the quiet, impenetrable authority you have cultivated simply by understanding, preparing, and existing. And so, as this part of the story closes, consider the horizon of what is coming next. Because the photo, the revelation, the exposure is only the beginning. What you have witnessed, what they have witnessed, is the first domino. The next moves are already set in motion, cascading in a way that is subtle, inexorable, and devastating to anyone who misjudged the boundaries of reality. The agents who left, the ones who understood too late, are only the start. There are others who will stumble into this understanding, who will perceive fragments, who will attempt to contain it, and who will fail, just as the first 17 did. And you will be ready. You will remain calm. You will remain untouchable. You will remain the constant axis around which all these tremors revolve, because you have never been the one to need validation or control. You simply align yourself with the truth of what exists, and the world, in all its chaotic potential, adjusts to your presence. And that alignment is where everything accelerates, because the moment the world adjusts to your presence, the people watching from the inside realize they're no longer observing a situation, they're inside it. After the first wave of resignations, the ones who stayed behind tried to convince themselves it was an overreaction, a stress response, a coincidence they could explain away if they spoke quietly enough among themselves. They gathered in small rooms, re-examining the enhanced image frame by frame, telling each other the same comforting story. That what appeared in that photo had to have a logical explanation, a shadow, a compression artifact, a trick of light. But the longer they stared, the worse it became, because every enhancement only clarified the same impossible detail, the same presence that refused to dissolve under scrutiny. And that's when the second realization hit them. Not just that something existed in the image, but that it had existed long before they ever noticed it. They began pulling records, timelines, cross-referencing dates connected to that photo. And the deeper they went, the more unsettled they became. The image wasn't isolated. It wasn't random. It aligned too cleanly with events they remembered being briefed on years ago. Events that were dismissed as noise, human error, coincidence. Suddenly, those old footnotes looked less like mistakes and more like warnings that were ignored because acknowledging them would have required humility. The ones still sitting at their desks felt a creeping awareness settle in. This photo was never supposed to be enhanced. It wasn't hidden for protection. It was left untouched because no one wanted to be the first person to confirm what it contained. And now that the confirmation existed, it couldn't be erased from memory. You could see it in their behavior almost immediately. Conversations shortened, decisions stalled. People who once spoke with authority now chose their words carefully, as if language itself had become dangerous. They stopped asking bold questions and started asking safe ones. What if we're wrong? What if this is nothing? What if we should stop looking? Those questions weren't about accuracy, they were about fear. Because deep down, every one of them knew the same thing. The photo didn't just reveal something external, it revealed how blind they had been. And that awareness is corrosive to anyone who built their identity around being in control of outcomes. The image kept circulating internally, copied into secure folders, pulled up on monitors late at night by people who couldn't sleep. Some stared at it, trying to disprove it. Others stared, hoping it would change. It never did. The detail stayed exactly where it was, consistent across every enhancement, every recalibration, every attempt to distort it into something harmless. And slowly, painfully, they realized the most unsettling aspect wasn't what the image showed, but what it implied. That there were limits to what they could understand, and those limits had been crossed without permission. That understanding alone was enough to push several more people to walk away, quietly handing in badges and credentials, claiming burnout or personal reasons, while knowing the real reason would follow them forever. You, meanwhile, weren't involved in any of these discussions. You didn't need to be. Your role was never operational. It was observational. You understood something they didn't. That truth doesn't announce itself. It waits. It allows assumptions to pile up around it until the weight becomes unbearable. And when it finally emerges, it doesn't argue. It simply exists, forcing everyone nearby to recalibrate or retreat. Watching them scramble now is almost surreal, because the chaos they're experiencing feels overdue, like a delayed reaction to a reality that has been present all along. The remaining agents began to fracture into camps. Some wanted to bury the image, restrict access, pretend the enhancement never happened. Others argued that suppression would only make things worse, that too many people had already seen it, already internalized what it meant. Arguments broke out over responsibility. Who authorized the enhancement? Who failed to flag the photo earlier? Who ignored the initial discomfort when the detail first appeared on screen? Each question landed like a quiet accusation, and with every accusation, trust eroded further. They weren't united anymore. They were isolated individuals sharing a space, each privately wondering if staying was a mistake. One detail about the photo began to disturb them more than anything else, the sense that it wasn't reacting to observation. No matter how many times it was analyzed, no matter how deeply it was dissected, it remained unchanged. There was no escalation, no distortion, no degradation. It was static, confident, unmoved by attention. That constancy unnerved them because it suggested intent without effort. Something that doesn't respond to scrutiny doesn't fear it. And that realization pushed the tension into a place none of them were trained to handle. They could manage threats that moved, that reacted, that escalated. This was different. This was presence without participation. As pressure mounted, leadership attempted to step in, issuing carefully worded directives, designed to calm nerves and reassert authority. But those words fell flat. Authority only works when the people listening believe it's grounded in understanding. Now everyone knew that understanding had gaps. And once those gaps are exposed, no amount of reassurance can seal them again. Meetings ended without resolution. Plans stalled halfway through execution. People began taking extended leave, avoiding the building, avoiding the image, avoiding the implications that followed them home at night. The environment became heavy, charged with unspoken dread. You could trace every ripple back to that single enhancement, that single decision to look closer instead of leaving the past undisturbed. And that's where the irony sharpens. They weren't punished for malicious intent. They weren't undone by arrogance alone. They were undone by curiosity without preparedness. They wanted clarity without consequence, answers without responsibility. And what they found refused to accommodate those desires. It didn't threaten them. It didn't pursue them. It simply forced them to confront the limits of their worldview. For some, that confrontation was intolerable. Outside those walls, nothing seemed different. The world moved on, unaware of the internal unraveling taking place. That disconnect made it worse. They wanted confirmation that what they were experiencing mattered, that it would be recognized, validated, explained. Instead, they were left alone with it, and isolation magnifies fear. It strips away the comfort of shared belief and leaves individuals face to face with uncertainty they cannot outsource. That's why more resignations followed, quiet departures, empty desks, emails announcing new opportunities that fooled no one who understood what had truly happened. Through all of this, your position remained unchanged. You didn't feel urgency. You didn't feel the need to intervene or clarify. You had already accepted something they were only beginning to grasp, that not everything revealed requires action. Some truths exist solely to reorder perception. The photo did exactly that. It rearranged priorities, exposed fragility, and forced a reckoning that couldn't be postponed. Watching them struggle now only reinforces what you've always known, that preparedness isn't about tools or authority, but about internal alignment with reality as it is, not as one wishes it to be. At some point, one of them finally asked the question they'd all been avoiding: how long has this been there? The answer, once acknowledged, was devastating. Longer than any of them had been in their roles, longer than most institutional memory could comfortably account for. That meant the oversight wasn't recent. It was inherited, passed down through assumptions, through training, through a culture that rewarded confidence over curiosity. The image had been waiting unchanged, while generations of analysts glanced past it, too busy trusting their frameworks to notice what didn't fit neatly inside them. That realization reframed everything. The problem wasn't the photo. The problem was the belief that reality would always conform to expectations. Once that belief cracked, it took everything built on top of it, with it. Careers, reputations, confidence, and the ones who stayed began to understand that walking away wasn't cowardice, it was self-preservation. Because staying meant confronting questions that had no satisfying answers, only deeper layers of uncertainty. You sensed the shift long before they articulated it. You recognized the pattern of retreat disguised as restructuring, the way institutions quietly shed people when comprehension fails. None of this surprised you. You've seen it before in smaller forms, in personal relationships, in professional spaces where assumptions collapse under pressure. The scale is different here, but the mechanics are the same. When perception changes, faster than identity can adapt, something has to give. And more often than not, it's the people who leave, not the truth. And now comes the real weight of understanding. The photo has done its work. It didn't need to scream. It didn't need to threaten. It simply existed, quietly, indelibly, unyielding. But what it triggered, what it set in motion, is what cannot be ignored. The people who stayed, they're unraveling internally, piece by piece, thought by thought, as if reality itself is revealing the inadequacy of every assumption they've ever clung to. They try to map it, categorize it, run analyses that they believe will restore their sense of control. But each calculation returns the same result. There are elements here beyond comprehension, beyond experience, beyond anything they can rationalize. And in that moment, they feel it, the visceral, primal recognition that they are facing something they were never meant to encounter, that the rules they relied on have been replaced by consequences they didn't anticipate, that their mastery was always an illusion. You, on the other hand, move differently. You don't panic, you don't scramble, you don't try to wrest control where it cannot exist. You exist. And that is what terrifies them most. They assume movement is always active, that power is loud, that authority must be visible. They are learning, slowly, painfully, that true presence is silent, that influence can exist without announcement, that authority can exist in calm observation rather than futile action. They measure themselves against chaos they manufacture, against assumptions they cling to, against projections of fear that they try to impose. But the photo, the revelation, has already reordered reality. And in this new configuration, you are the constant axis. Every tremor radiates from you. Every reaction, every failure to adapt, every resignation or retreat proves your presence without requiring it to assert itself. Now watch them. Watch as comprehension overtakes them incrementally, insidiously, until panic creeps into the margins of every decision. They check and double-check. They query databases. They revisit old files. They question colleagues, all in a futile attempt to reclaim certainty. And the longer they search, the more they realize that certainty is gone. It was never present. It was only the fragile scaffold of assumption they built on shaky ground. And that scaffold has collapsed because one simple act, enhancing an old photo, revealed a truth they cannot deny, a truth they cannot erase, a truth that exists independently of desire, fear, or authority. That is the exact precision of the force you represent. Immovable, indisputable, unavoidable. Some of them begin to talk to one another in hushed tones, whispering fragments of what they saw, trying to rationalize collective understanding, thinking perhaps together they can reconstruct the sense of control they have lost. But the whispers only amplify the terror. Because when multiple people realize simultaneously that the framework they relied on is broken, that the image contains evidence of something outside normal perception, the convergence doesn't comfort, it isolates. It isolates because now every mind involved is aware that knowledge has limits, that comprehension has edges, that experience is finite and inadequate. And in that isolation, the few who are left become increasingly erratic, searching for solutions in protocols that no longer function, in hierarchies that no longer exist, in authority they can no longer trust. Meanwhile, you operate above these dynamics. You watch the fallout without interference, without urgency, because you have always understood the distinction between knowledge and power. Knowledge alone never suffices. Understanding alone never protects. but the alignment of perception with reality, the attunement to what is, the awareness of what cannot be undone, that is power. That is what they fail to grasp. They imagine they control the world, the narrative, the interpretation. They imagine that resignation, exit, protocol, or policy can re-establish normalcy. And in imagining that, they reveal how completely unprepared they were for what existed all along, quietly and permanently, in plain sight, until someone dared to look. As these days pass, the pattern becomes unmistakable. Internal chaos spreads, projects stall. Analysts begin questioning everything they once held sacred. Supervisors overcompensate with stricter oversight. New protocols are drafted in haste, designed to restore illusion rather than function. Every step they take, every attempt to recalibrate, every effort to recover confidence, only reinforces the one unshakable truth. The enhanced photo was not just a document. It was a vector of exposure, a conduit of revelation, an instrument of unavoidable recalibration. And you, once again, are the observer, untouched, omnipresent, unshakable, while they drown in the weight of knowledge they cannot process. Consider the people who quit first. Their departure was more than resignation. It was confession. They left not because they were weak, not because they were incapable, but because exposure is a force they cannot manage. They realized that continuing to engage would force them to confront variables they are unequipped to understand, consequences they cannot control, and truths that cannot be ignored. And in leaving, they confirmed something critical, that the reality revealed in that photo is not compatible with conventional frameworks. It is external, untouchable, permanent. It does not bend to hierarchy. It does not negotiate with protocol. It simply exists, and in its existence, it has already restructured perception. The ones who remain experience the collapse differently. Their process is slower, insidious. It begins with small doubts, discomfort in routine analysis, hesitation in judgment, second-guessing previously unquestioned directives. Then comes the creeping paranoia. Who has seen this? Who understands it? Who will act on it? Every movement of every colleague becomes a potential threat. Every email becomes a potential disclosure. Every glance at a monitor, every footstep in a hallway feels weighted with implication. The room fills with tension that is both personal and systemic. And yet you, the observer of this unfolding, remain detached. You are neither observer nor participant in panic. You are the constant, the anchor, the axis around which these tremors are defined. There is an elegance to this chaos, if one has the eyes to see it. The photo did not create fear. It did not issue threats. It did not act. It existed. That is the brilliance of it. That is the cruelty of comprehension. The people who attempt to control, to rationalize, to reassert authority are undone not by action, but by revelation. It is the revelation itself that fractures confidence, that forces resignations, that erodes certainty, that reshapes careers, hierarchies, and mental stability. And you, aligned perfectly with the reality that cannot be altered, watch it unfold with absolute clarity, knowing that preparation was never about weapons, about countermeasures, about overt dominance. Preparation was about presence, alignment, patience, and understanding the contours of truth before others dared to recognize them. And then comes the ripple effect. The image circulates beyond the immediate group, transferred to analysts who were previously uninvolved. These newcomers are struck in the same way as the first 17 agents. Some resign immediately, leaving no trace except a quiet email and an empty chair. Others struggle to rationalize, spending sleepless nights on analysis that returns only the same result. Something exists that should not, and it cannot be contained. Each transmission of the enhanced photo, each new pair of eyes that cannot unsee, multiplies the impact. The network of comprehension grows exponentially. The world of perception shifts incrementally, yet the core truth remains unchanged, static, undeniable, and permanent. And you remain outside the panic, observing the exponential consequence of alignment without agitation. At some point, the thought occurs to the remaining personnel that perhaps they could find someone else to interpret the photo. An expert who might rationalize it, neutralize it, render it harmless. That effort is quietly made, carefully controlled. Analysts submit requests. Supervisors coordinate evaluations. But it is too late. Expertise does not mitigate truth. Knowledge does not neutralize reality. The more layers of interpretation they apply, the clearer it becomes. The image resists simplification. It cannot be explained away. And that resistance is the most powerful weapon of all. It is the revelation itself asserting its independence from human expectation. And through it, you remain untouchable, unshaken, aligned with the constants of reality while they crumble in its margins. The psychological impact deepens with each passing day. The people who stayed begin to compare themselves to those who left. They replay interactions, recall decisions, revisit assumptions. They realize that leaving wasn't weakness, it was clarity. They realize that staying exposes every gap in comprehension, every flaw in judgment, every misalignment between perception and reality. And in that realization, they begin to fracture internally, not with violence or confrontation, but with the slow, corrosive erosion of certainty. That erosion is unstoppable, because certainty was never there to begin with. It was a facade, a prop, a fragile architecture of convenience that the photo, enhanced and undeniable, has already demolished. And you continue to exist at the center of this unfolding truth. You do not manipulate, you do not intervene. You simply observe, perfectly attuned, unshakable, aligned with what exists rather than what others wish to perceive. That is what drives the residual panic, what drives sleepless nights, what drives resignations and quiet departures. They see you, even when you do not enter the room. They feel your alignment, your unflinching presence, your unyielding calm. They measure themselves against it and fail. Every attempt to recreate control, every attempt to assert knowledge, every effort to rationalize the unexplainable collapses against the immovable presence that you represent. And that presence was never earned, never claimed, never manufactured. It simply is. By the time the last waves of resignations and internal upheaval occur, the scope of impact is unmistakable. The enhanced photo has done more than reveal what was hidden. It has reshaped behavior, reorganized authority, altered career trajectories, and rewritten perception. Entire teams are reconstructed, protocols revised, trust fractured permanently. Every person involved, whether they resigned or remained, carries the impact with them. And yet you remain unaffected because you understand the distinction between exposure and reaction, between revelation and panic, between presence and desperation. The forces that crumble around you cannot touch you because you are aligned with reality, not with desire or assumption. And here's the ultimate consequence they can't process. No apology, no rationalization, no internal restructuring can return what was lost. Not knowledge, not composure, not certainty, not status. Those who quit cannot reclaim the illusion of control. Those who stayed cannot reclaim the clarity, they lacked before the enhancement. And you, standing at the center of it all, remain untouched, a living testament to alignment, observation, and presence. The photo, the revelation, the panic, they are all echoes of a truth that does not negotiate, does not bend, and cannot be dismissed. And that truth has been revealed entirely through the act of seeing, through the act of observation, through the act of alignment with what exists rather than what should exist. In the end, the enhanced photo is no longer a simple image. It is an instrument of inevitability, a focal point through which truth manifests, a catalyst that exposes weakness, magnifies assumptions, and reveals the fragility of those who mistake authority for comprehension. The 17 agents who quit are remembered not as failures, but as necessary calibrations in a chain reaction that the world could not have predicted. Those who remained are changed irreversibly, haunted by the recognition of limits they cannot overcome. And you are the axis of this recalibration, the immovable force around which all tremors revolve, the observer who understood from the beginning that truth does not need to be forced, only witnessed. The story concludes not with action, not with confrontation, not with spectacle, but with revelation fully realized, consequences fully manifest, and presence fully aligned. The world has shifted, perception has been rewritten, authority has been fractured, and knowledge has met its boundaries. The enhanced photo did not create this outcome, it revealed it. It illuminated what had always existed, always been present, always been waiting for someone capable of seeing without distortion. And you remain calm, untouchable, unshakable. The constant axis around which reality has finally adjusted itself, unyielding, unstoppable, undeniable. Because what was revealed was never meant to be seen. But now that it has, nothing and no one will ever return to the illusion of certainty that once existed.